Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, daily dose of nature on safari, a NatHab webcast exclusive from Africa, presented by NatHab expedition leaders Richard de Gouveia and Matt Meyer. It is always a pleasure to have you here today, gentlemen. Richard, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thanks, Kendall, and thank you, WWF. I think Matt and I are really excited to sit here with you and go through this amazing bit of time we spent at Sabi Sabi Private Game Reserve, where we just had a brilliant moment to be able to capture some amazing sightings and bring them back and show you guys. Matt, what did you think about that whole experience of being out at Sabi Sabi?
Yeah, thanks, Kendall. Thanks, NatHab WWF, for putting us out there and for hosting us tonight. And I just want to make this abundantly clear is that what we're about to show you in this condensed hour and a half of our webinar happened in 3 days. We were only out there, we were there for 3 nights, so call it 3.5 days if you want to really stretch out our time frame. And all of this happened over that short amount of time. That just shows how unbelievable this piece of land is at Sabi Sabi Private Game Reserve in South Africa. And as you'll hear us talking about it throughout the sort of the length of the videos that we and what we're presenting tonight, is just the population and the densities of some of these animals. They allowed us to see this over such a short amount of time. It was incredible. It was spectacular.
Absolutely. And Matt and I were at home in the Sabi Sands in Sabi Sabi. Matt worked right next door at a reserve called Mala Mala. I worked at Sabi Sabi for about 6 years. And you get to know the areas really well, which also helped us through this whole process. And it was just nice to be amongst 2 guides. Matt and I normally in different places with different groups. So to have 2 guides together, and the banter and the craziness were amazing. But the one part of the whole thing that stands out always when we get into the Sabi Sands are leopards. Now, my leopard for me is my favorite animal of all the animals. It stands out. It took me 16 years of doing safari before I saw my first one. And since then, it's been a gluttony. And I know, Matt, you also feel the same way about leopards. You just love leopards too.
Yeah, it's just this. It's where the Sabi and the Sand River sort of collide in the southern Sabi Sands. That sort of funnel is, if you can imagine, if you know East Africa at all, anyone that's watching, you've got what's called the Lamai Wedge. It kind of funnels all of the wildebeest into when they go across the Meyer River. It's very similar in this area for leopards. It's the perfect environment for them. You've got these riverine thickets, tall, big trees, and a density of their prey, of game, that just allows them to thrive there. Known as arguably one of the most dense populations of leopards anywhere in Africa is the Sabi Sands.
So, Kendall, if you can start the first video, and then we'll chat a bit about that sighting once we've done the video. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm going to bring it up now, and just a reminder for everyone watching, it may open in a separate window for you if you're on a computer, so keep an eye out for that if you're not seeing it at first.
Right, so just in front of us here is a male leopard, and I'm over the moon to see this guy, because this male I got the privilege of seeing at the ripe young age of 2 weeks old. And back then his mother, named Nottins, was an incredible female that offered a lot of our leopard sightings, and I got to watch him grow up till he was old enough, and then he left the reserve and went north to go and do things in another place, and he took over a great big territory, had many different females, and now he's returned back to his natal territory right at the age where he's probably tapering off his breeding, and He's probably not going to have too much interaction with ladies anymore, but it's so incredible to see him from this little bundle of fur that could barely walk to this incredibly powerful dominant male that he's turned into now.
So folks, behind us here we have these two male leopards that are, it appears to be that they're in a battle of sorts. In Sabi Sabi Game Reserve and in the Sabi Sands, southern Kruger, this area is known for its incredibly high density of leopards. Male leopards will set up a territory, and essentially they'll have a core territory and then a fringe territory, and those will be heavily protected because obviously inside those territories will be their females. They will then patrol around and protect, and that'll obviously then protect their progeny, their offspring, which is the ultimate goal for any male in the wild. And so typically when two male leopards will meet each other, they will what's sort of called parallel walking, where they'll walk shoulder to shoulder, sometimes for days at a time, sussing each other out, seeing who is stronger, who is not, and sometimes it leads to claws and teeth and fur flying everywhere, and other times they'll realize that they're evenly matched, it's not worth the conflict, it's not worth potential injury, and they'll go their separate ways, and that will kind of be their boundary that they've set up. So we're just going to see what happens over here over the next couple of hours.
Right, so it has officially been 4 hours of us being with these leopards. They have shouted at each other, growled at each other. There's actually one calling there, not the bird, the leopard. And unfortunately, there comes a time where you've got to weigh up whether we're going to be here till midnight or if they'll only fight tomorrow. So we're going to head home and call it a good day of spending time with two male leopards fighting for territory, even though it was a shouting match most of the day.
All right, amazing footage, guys.
Thanks, Kendall. What an experience that was. It's just amazing to be in a situation like that. And Matt, what's crazy is we were talking about how it could end up as nothing because they're evenly matched. And I was back a month later, and I found them doing the exact same thing still, but got closer and there was more shouting. So it was sort of building to this crescendo. But I mean, I think the way you summed it up was perfect, but go through some of those emotions that you feel when you got those big cats right next to you doing that.
Well, I mean, it's that anticipation the whole time. It's just building and building and building. I mean, I've lost count of the number of times I've seen that conflict sort of sitting there. And if you can imagine, I mean, male leopards, if you can imagine putting two magnets together, they push each other away if they're even. But as soon as one flips around, occasionally you'll just get that other one that'll run up behind them, and that's when it'll start. So it just takes one to step away too soon. But I mean, if they're evenly matched, it's only going to happen that they're going to have that sort of clash if one of them turns away, if one of them is distracted by a second. I mean, I've seen two male leopards. We had his name was the bicycle crossing male, and then the other male was the Imsachwen male, and they were literally nose to nose roaring at each other. They were, I mean, it's not very socially distanced these days, but they were roaring. And when a male leopard, when they've been fighting and they've been sniffing because their olfactory system is working on overdrive, they're smelling these different scents, so they're over hyper producing saliva. And so when they're roaring, it's just like it's Godzilla kind of spit and all of that coming out. And these guys are face to face doing that. and they went their separate ways. 2 weeks later, they were right neck and neck, and all it took was a hyena coming past, and boom, then it was a battle royale. And then they wouldn't leave each other alone. They were just tearing each other apart. It was incredible.
Unbelievable. And also, I mean, the fact that we saw 3 big male leopards within the same day, because the one was in the morning and then these 2 were in the afternoon, is unbelievable. And that young male for me was the oldest male, the day 1 male that we saw first. It was so surreal seeing him again, because this whole movement and understanding how leopards are very fluid in their movement of their territories and how they push and pull. And then later that day to see these 2 bouncing off. Now, if he'd come into the fray, he wouldn't stick around for that fight, because he's probably just past that prime where he's going, yeah, I'm not worth this fight. Or the other males are going to look at him and go, whoa, he's quite a big guy, because he had a massive dewlap. He just looked a lot bigger than these boys. So it's a fascinating thing to be part of. Kendall, I think we're going to go on to what leopards eat. If we can show the impala video now, please.
Absolutely, bringing that up now. And just a reminder for everyone watching, it's possible that the video player may be opening in a separate window that is minimized or hidden, so keep an eye out for that. All right, here we go.
So you can see behind me here we've got a herd of impala, probably the most abundant of the antelope species in this area, but often the most overlooked because they're literally around every single corner. But I've got an affinity for them. I kind of like the impala, and they play an integral part of this ecosystem. And one of the things that the Sabi Sands in the southern part of the Kruger is most well known for are their predators. So your lions, leopards, wild dogs, cheetah, and these guys make up a predominant level of their food source. Mixed feeders, so they not only eat the abundant greys but also browns, and especially this time of year their diet will predominantly move down towards the ground level. They'll eat a lot of the grasses that we've got going, and have a very interesting breeding biology where they have the ability to retain their youngsters giving birth until optimum environmental conditions. So the males will go through a rut in sort of your April-May time of year, and then November, December, the females start lambing. Occasionally you will have a few females that aren't impregnated at that time, and they'll go through a false rut in the middle of winter, and then those ones will then be born at the beginning of sort of February, March. And at that time of year it's chaos with all of these baby impala around every corner, and the predators having their pick with everything. But when the females give birth, they will stash them in some thicket, kind of like behind where we're sitting, behind where they are over there, and they'll only come back to them a couple of times a day to let them nurse, and then they'll leave them going back to the herd. And that's to allow for them to sort of get their legs, start being able to run and walk around without imprinting the females or the mother's scent on them. So they're born completely scentless, and that's one of their adaptations for anti-predators, because you'll have this little baby impala that'll be stashed away in a bush, and it won't move. I've seen lions walk within 3 or 4 feet of a baby impala, doesn't move an inch. And so yeah, they are, I think they're one of the most beautiful antelope that we get out here, and even if they are around every single corner.
So one of the things that I mentioned was that they are essentially the main food source in the area of the Sabi Sands, making up more than 50% of the diet of most of the predators. I was in the Sabi Sands maybe a month later, and out of the 2 of us, I would say I have the least of the bloodlust when it comes to witnessing kills. I still enjoy it. It's still fascinating and interesting to watch. But a lot of my guide buddies just get when they see something die. And I was there the next month, and we witnessed 4 kills in 4 days. 3 of those 4 were impala. One was the Stenbok, and the remainder. So that's just in one group witness 75% of the diet of, and that was lion, leopard, and wild dog. 75%. So that just shows their abundance in the area.
Yeah, and when it gets where it gets really fascinating for me is when we talk evolution and how things have changed over time. Impalas remained unchanged for 5 million years. It hasn't needed to change. It is that perfect for its environment and what's going on around it. And the drive behind that and its necessity to, you know, when there's the rut and the males actually cover all the females, 98% of the breeding age females will end up pregnant. So you have this massive increase of in numbers around that November, December, January time when all the lambs start dropping, and everything's involved in eating them. Just now, not only the leopards, the lions, and the and cheetah and things like that, the bigger predators, but now you've got eagles that are eating them. You've got pythons, snakes that are eating them. You've got smaller things like caracal and jackals, and everything's taking advantage of this meat source. So they're incredibly important, very beautiful, and keep themselves looking beautiful. And like Matt said, they're beautiful to be with. We often over or underestimate the power of just sitting there and watching them. They've got specially adapted bottom teeth that move in their sockets, allowing them to comb through and get their ticks out. So they're always beautifully combed and looking great. I think, Kendall, if you've got some questions for us, we'll go through a couple of those now.
Yeah, we've got some good questions for you. So first question, did you have a tracking device on the leopard? A lot of people were wondering how you knew it was the same leopard that you saw as a young cub.
Right, so there's no tracking devices on any of these things. The closest thing we have to a tracking device is the gentleman you see sitting in the front called the tracker, and he's looking for footprints of these animals. And how we know the difference between one leopard and another are through spot patternings. So just above the whisker line, there are actually spots that go along here, and along the head, along the eyes. Their ears are also a big telltale sign, and any scarring that happens on their face. So what we do is we look at those spot patternings or spot patterns to be able to tell which individual it is. So a lot of them you'll say 2 spots this side and 3 spots this side, or 2 big spots and 1 little spot and a bigger spot here. And we build these ID kits, and these are used and have been followed for generations of leopards, which allow us to create this unbelievable picture of what's going on there. So Matt, will you explain to us a bit about how Panthera has gone into the area and what they've done with the Sabi Sands and the knowledge of these leopards because of how they're followed?
Yeah, so I mean, it's essentially every leopard has not only their entire spot patterning is unique to that individual from when it's a cub. So it's a fingerprint. The picture that Rich had of that leopard cub, if you were to look at that leopard cub as it is a cub, even if it's this big, it's got the exact same spots as the day it dies. And essentially, it's, if you were to imagine a balloon, so the next time you got a balloon, you draw a bunch of dots on it, and then you blow it up, and it expands. So the spot pattern shifts, but ultimately remains the same. Now, this organization called Panthera are doing incredible work worldwide on all large cats. So lions, leopards, tigers, jaguars, any large cats, any Panthera, they're doing research on. Historically, one of the most difficult things to do, though, was to identify these. And so we were fortunate to work in the Sabi Sands, where these leopards will, if your path or their path comes through the vehicle and they want to go past, they go underneath the vehicles. They are completely unencumbered by these vehicles because they know that they are no threat. So we were very fortunate, as Rich said, gluttonous in our experiences with leopards. But that's not the case if you were setting up camera traps in Chad or in the Kalahari Desert, where they were actually, I was recently there, and Panthera was there earlier last year. And so they also had to then do sort of spot recognitions on their flank. And that is how unique these spots are to an individual leopard. So they can tell an ID on the flank of a leopard, not just their face. So some reserves do have tracking telemetry and that on their animals, on their leopards, but certainly not in the Sabi Sands, and at least not for finding them. They might have some of them microchipped to do some research on movements, but the way that we as guides would have found them would have been through using the incredible knowledge of someone like Donald, who we had, to track them, to spot them, to find them. And then you read the bush. You listen for the calls of animals, you listen for the sounds, you see the tracks, and so on. So there's just a lot that goes into the finding of these creatures and the identification. And someone like Rich has seen this cub, and I also had a few leopards that I'd witnessed from birth to death. And once that spot pattern recognition, once you can recognize it, it's like when you would go to the office every day and you recognize your colleagues, we would recognize the individual leopards.
Wow, that's so fascinating. So while you're on the topic of Sabi Sands, there were a few questions about it. One person was wondering when the best time of year to visit is, and how large is the private reserve, and how close is it to Kruger? And another question is it fenced? Can you just talk a little bit more about Sabi Sands?
So the Sabi Sands is about 65,000 hectares total around the outside perimeter. I'm talking about the properties that were involved in the Sabi Sands in its inception. So a few properties have split off from that, Mala Mala and Sabi Sabi being some of those. But accumulatively, that entire reserve is about 140,000 acres. There's a fence around the perimeter of it, and then there is a fence around the perimeter of the Kruger. So so far as where we were at Sabi Sabi Private Game Reserve, there is no fence around that immediate perimeter. So the animals have free movement and free range to move from Sabi Sabi to Mala Mala to the Kruger National Park.
So those fences between the Sabi Sands and Kruger National Park were actually dropped in 1994 because, and they were literally a small fence for foot and mouth disease to stop buffalo moving across. And then eventually they dropped those fences, and now it's part of this greater system, which is incredible because you have animals moving in that you've never seen. Now we have these leopard imprints, we understand the different animals, lions, prides, males, all of these different things, and suddenly you get these new individuals moving in, and it can really create some interesting dynamics within the system of the whole thing. I think from there, Kendall, let's take it and move on to rhinos, and we'll keep going on these questions once we get down to the end.
Perfect. All right. I will bring up the rhinos video now, and just once more, remember this video player may open in a separate window.
Right, so behind us we've got a mother and a rhino calf, and what looks to be her last calf. So the new calf probably is a couple of months old, and the older calf is probably around 4 years, 5 years old, and it's at this crossover point where she'll probably be trying to move off the older calf so that she can just concentrate her attention on the younger one. Now, because of their very poor eyesight, their vision range is probably about 100 feet that they can pick up movement from, but I've seen these guys get surprised by a tree stump that's right next to their face. Now, what happens is, because of this low eyesight or this poor eyesight, they can be quite inquisitive, and what we had was the mother and the calf coming up to have a closer look at us, to get a feel for what we were and what we were doing. And it's this incredible experience as they're moving close to you and you're sitting quietly and just taking it all in. Now, unfortunately, these animals are under incredible threat at the moment. Their horns are used for various medicinal reasons in the Far East, and they are poached extensively. In Kruger alone, 70% of the population has declined over the last 10 years. So that's a huge number of rhinos that have been poached, and their numbers are dropping every day. And this fight is a very difficult fight based on the value of horn and its value outside, and the poverty that surrounds a lot of the areas in Africa where these animals are being poached. So there are dedicated anti-poaching teams that are about. There are a lot of different programs in order to try and motivate and keep these animals safe. So the anti-poaching, they will dart and notch the rhinos and also put microchips in their horns, and even some reserves have gone as far as dehorning the animals in order to keep them safe or to minimize the risk. However, very recently I was in a reserve called the Pilansberg just outside of Johannesburg, and I saw a poached rhino right next to a main road, and the rhino was poached for a horn that had already been cut off. So the value is so great in that horn that even the stump that's left after the dehorning has a massive value to these people. Now, rhinos in general will move around and graze. These are white rhinos. There's a big difference between white and black rhinos, specifically diet. And these white rhinos, this mother will be looking after this calf for at least the next 4 years before she has her next calf. Right, so on the baby now, you can see that there is a bird with a red bill on it. It's called a red-billed oxpecker, and this bird, its role in the environment is actually to pick ticks off of these animals. He looks after the ticks. He will eat it because of the nutrition based on blood. So these guys move around, a lot of the large herbivores, picking off these ticks. But what can happen, let's say these rhinos end up in a fight and there's a cut or something along the lines of it sitting there, they will actually keep that wound open and parasitize the host species by keeping that wound open and drinking the blood straight from these guys. So as much as they are helpful in a greater sense, they can also be a hindrance in others. So one of WWF's primary projects within the Southern Africa wilderness area is a project called Keta. It is a vitally important project whereby WWF is trying to train up and integrate communities into this natural environment. Historically, a lot of the areas here have had forced removals and people moved away from their homelands in order to create these parks. And then there's a great disconnect put up between communities and these areas by putting up fences. One, to keep animals inside, and two, to keep people out. And this has created a lot of tension. So what WWF tries to do is to educate these people, to bring in incredible knowledge, to train up people from local communities to become rangers and field guides, to bring in crime scene tests to be able to ensure that any animal trafficking can be correctly enforced and prosecuted at the later stage. In general, poaching and wildlife trafficking have an incredibly negative effect on a country's ecosystem. In the greatest sense, it promotes corruption, it promotes all sorts of problematic things from the top down. So by instilling the right laws, the right understanding, and the right resources, WWF is fighting this from the top down. And it has an incredible impact on local communities by creating jobs, by creating a connection between the local communities and these environments to uplift and sustain these areas and the people that surround them for many generations to come.
We can't talk about the WWF in Africa without introducing their very first project that was started on black rhinos in Africa in the 1960s. When the WWF first came in here, that was their species of focus. And that has evolved over the last half a century now into the early 2000s, 2003, 2004, into the amalgamation of what they have called the Black Rhino Range Expansion Project. They have effectively and successfully expanded the range of black rhinos by about 200,000 hectares. So we're looking at about 500,000 acres, and they have increased the numbers by over 100 individuals that have been born in those wild areas. And essentially what they would do is they would take a black rhino and from any high-risk reserve and remove it and take it into another reserve. They also then allow genetics to be moved from fragmented populations, from fragmented conservation areas, because that is essentially something that would have historically taken place, whereby enabling a black rhino bull who is, let's say, in this part, in this section, to move across a couple of 100 miles or a couple of dozen miles into another section, and thereby moving his genetics around with him. However, when we have now created these reserve, put fences around, we can't do that. So that is an incredibly successful project that has been ongoing now for the last 20 years, but had its original inception in the 60s when the WWF first came here to Africa. So rhinos in this environment that we're in at the moment in Sabi Sabi Private Game Reserve in South Africa in the Kruger National Park, they form an integral part of this environment and this ecosystem, and they hold a role, what we call a keystone species, whereby there are a lot of roll-on and a lot of lower down, if you want to call them that, animals that rely on them for their survival. And so by protecting an animal like a rhino, you're essentially protecting the environment in which they live in. They are extensively poached for their horn, and we've lost about 70% of the population of rhinos over the course of the last 10 years in this area. We've already saved them from extinction once, where we got the southern white rhino population down to about 200 or 300. And we brought that number up to close on 15 to 18,000, and most of the rest of rhinos across Africa have come from this genetic pool in southern Africa. And so to have to go through all of that again, the resources, the manpower, the time and effort, it will happen, but it would be a lot better if we could use those resources to protect other animals. But in this environment, if you are essentially protecting a rhino, you will be protecting everything else that is in its environment. So you're protecting elephants, you're protecting lions and leopards, and all of the other species in the Greater Kruger Park and any of the reserves that rhinos are in.
Freaking awesome. Well said, Matt. Yep. Did you see the impala at the end?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. And I've noticed something, that you've also got you've got a Cape turtle dove following you around. Yeah.
It's my gift.
It's calling in almost everything that you're speaking. You've got this Cape turtle dove in the background.
Yeah.
But no, the projects that are ongoing that we, by just being in these places, are supporting is phenomenal. And as Rich mentioned, a project like Keta, it protects these keystone species that we're looking at, the elephants, the rhinos, and by protecting that, you're essentially protecting the whole ecosystem. And by coming on a safari, a virtual safari, an in-person safari, you are doing your part in protecting those animals. And so you get an amazing experience. And then you also get to live, like, think about, I've protected them, I've helped protect these animals.
It's becoming a bigger tourist draw card, is this very eco-friendly tourism or conservation-minded tourism, where you can actually now pay to be part of a rhino darting, where you will be there when they dart the thing, you help them put it down, you make sure it's wet and it's kept cool, you're helping the vets, you're monitoring certain things, and you're right up there touching the animal. And there is no greater experience than seeing how big a rhino really is. It looks big when it's next to you, but when you are on the ground next to one, it is freaking enormous. You actually just can't even understand it. So it's a great drive for us to try and get these projects off the ground and do more of it, so that there's more research, more people falling in love with these animals and giving a reason for them to step out of their way and try and help them. I think from that, I think we've said enough about that for now. We're going to go on to the Dwarf Mongoose, and then Kendall will take some questions after that.
Okay, sounds great. Here we go.
Right, so here we've got a group of dwarf mongoose, the smallest carnivore in Africa. These little guys will move around, they'll kill everything from little insects all the way through to snakes and scorpions. Moving around in little groups, they have an alpha male and an alpha female, which do and look after the whole group. And what's fascinating is in this termite mound where their heads keep popping up and down, in the mornings, they will, even if they sleep in a little bit late, they have a relationship with a bird called a yellow-billed hornbill, sometimes known as Zazu from the Lion King. And if these guys have overslept, what these guys will do is the hornbills will come onto the mound and chirp and say, hey, wake up, get up, we need to get moving. And at that point, the big alpha male will stand outside the hole, he'll wait for the rest of the group, and they will have to come behind him and rub up against this little anal gland which he has, which scent marks each and every single one of them. So when they come back home at night after a day of foraging, what he will do is he will sit like a bouncer and inspect every single one, make sure that it is his tribe coming back to that hole. Now these guys have very incredible relationships with different animals. One of the relationships is with that yellow-billed hornbill. The reason why they call them out like that is simply because they want to feed together. As the mongoose move through the grass, they disturb insects and the hornbills get to catch things, and vice versa. There's also another little bird out here, a fork-tailed drongo, that plays a little bit more of a sinister role. And he's learned the language of these guys, and what he will do is he will wait until one of these little guys catches an insect or something he wants to eat, and he will give an alarm call, sending all of these mongoose scattering around, and he will then swoop in and steal that from them. There is also a third animal that these guys have an incredible relationship with, and that animal is a giant plated lizard. Now this giant plated lizard will live inside the mounds and move from mound to mound as these guys move their home, and he eats all of their feces, getting nutrients from the exoskeletons and cleaning up their home. So there's this beautiful symbiotic relationship. So one little predator, one little carnivore has so many relationships and so many different links throughout this ecosystem. How can one not love this cute little face?
I love those guys. What do you think about them, Matt?
They are so cute. I once, and it was sad, but I mean, it happened so quickly. And then the mother came and dashed it away. But we were walking and surprised the colony of them, and they just scattered and left this tiny little guy. I mean, I'm talking, he could probably sit in a thimble, and he just sat there going, meow, meow, meow. And then mom came running, picked him up, and dashed straight out. But I mean, they're about that big. So an adult dwarf mongoose from nose to base of tail is that big, and then you add a tail on. So it would fill this computer screen very easily, and just incredible to watch them run around and scuttle around, go after things. I mean, yeah, like you said, they'll eat anything in their path. Small snakes, beetles, any insects, just great little critters to sit there and spend time with on those termite mounds.
Yeah, I've even had walks where we're doing walking safaris, and you come upon them and you just get all the guests to sit down, and you just sit there quietly, you make a little scratching noise or a little high-pitched noise, and they all come out and they scurry out and come closer and closer and closer just to have a look at you. Oh, what's going on? Oh, who are you? Oh, it's very cool. Love it. Absolutely love it. Kendall, do you have any?
Bobbing up and down.
Do you have any questions for us, Kendall?
Yeah, we've got a couple good questions for you. So first one, a lot of people were curious if you could explain the difference between white and black rhinos, and which kind of rhino are we seeing in this video?
So the white rhino is what we were looking at there. It's what Rich has behind him, and is this rhino here. The rest of these are black rhinos. So white rhino, square lip, and is a grazer, so only eats grass. So their dung piles are typically larger and very easy to tell because it's only grass. Then a black rhino has got a hook lip like that, and it's almost a prehensile lip that they can use to then grasp branches, and then they chomp branches off, and so their dung is predominantly sort of hardier, woody material, also a little bit smaller, about that big, and there's size difference as well. So a black rhino, a big bull black rhino, will tip the scales at about 2,500 pounds, maybe 3,000 pounds, whereas a big bull white rhino can be tipping the scales at almost 5,000 pounds. And then just their distribution currently, black rhinos are found in southwestern southern Africa, with a few spotted populations in eastern southern Africa, and then the white rhino is in eastern southern Africa and then up into East Africa, and then in East Africa they kind of share the same space. But you would usually find black rhino in slightly denser vegetation, so more browse. They like scrubby, sort of your acacia mellifera thickets, your tambuti thickets, dicrostacris, that kind of stuff, that doesn't grow very tall. Whereas white rhino usually in more open environments and grasslands. And then historically, the big difference was thought that they were solitary and gregarious, that the black rhino was solitary and white rhinos were gregarious. They would live in these groups. And until recently, that was then put out of the, like you see behind. I mean, I remember one night at Marulas driving back along the airstrip just after a fire break had been burnt on the airstrip, and that's a mile-long airstrip. We counted 27 rhinos, 27 white rhinos. And that was thought, okay, it's only white rhinos that do that. Black rhinos are usually only seen by themselves. And then some footage came out that sent the BBC out to Etosha National Park in Namibia, and they spent months filming at Ukukuyu, a pan in the south, and they got this phenomenal footage of black rhinos interacting, and they're actually a lot more social than what we once thought, but just very different behavior types. Usually they come together, whereas white rhino hang out together and they stay together. Black rhinos are typically seen by themselves, and they're either running at you very quickly or they're running away from you very quickly, whereas white rhinos just kind of sit there and chomp their grass and like, hey, what's up?
Yeah, Exactly. Anything else, Kendall?
Yeah, there was a question here about poaching that I thought would be good to address. With technology available today, especially heat sensing and night vision drones, why does poaching still continue at such an alarming rate?
So, great question. A lot of those technologies are being employed. The areas, though, that they have to cover are immense. And you're looking at areas, I mean, just the Greater Kruger National Park is over 5 million acres. So, cool. One, where do you get the funds for that many drones and for that many people to operate the drones? And then how do you get the people to where the drone is fast enough to be able to do it? Because they're massive tracts of lands within Kruger, bigger than the Sabi Sands. So there are tracts of lands of wilderness with no road access that are 300, 400,000 acres that you cannot get into. So, you know, it's all good and well having the technology, it's the implication thereof. And then, as I alluded to in what WWF's trying to get by, is working from the top down and breaking down the corruption aspect of it, because the corruption is the biggest problem that we face with all of it. It's inside jobs, it's people being able to get away with it, with people being caught and going, oh, slap on the wrist, here's a 50,000 Rand fine, that's like $3,000. Here's $3,000 fine. Cheers. Take your horn with you too, and you go get $200,000 for that horn, but we'll charge you $3,000 and you'll be out. So there's huge issues. I've personally witnessed 17 different rhinos that had been poached. Matt, what's your feeling on the thing? I know you have a very strong point of view on this.
It's just the implications of funding, essentially, and that funding getting to the right places. There are a lot of political moves that have created these different ways and means of poaching being able to take place, but it comes down to manpower and economics. And to give you an idea, 5 million acres is an impossible space to conceptualize. That's over 3 times the size of Yellowstone National Park in the United States. So just that extent, and then it's bigger than some small European countries, and you've got the majority, well, formerly the majority of Africa's population of southern white rhinos living in those. To man those areas is just it's near impossible. So for small private landowners who have got you've got 1,000 miles of a perimeter fence around the Kruger Park. Just to man that alone is extensive manpower. Then you've got the helicopters. They've got a dozen helicopters up there. It just, the numbers are just, it's unfathomable. And so to get that funding, to do it properly with the technology, implement the technology, train people to do it, you're talking hundreds of millions, if not billions of rands, billions of dollars for one species in one park, to do it properly, to ensure that nothing happens. Or you can work on a more strategic anti-corruption system, which will cost significantly less, have less manpower, but ultimately might be a slower process. So it's as I mentioned in the video, it's been done before. We've brought them back from extinction once before, but it would be absolutely heartbreaking to have to do it again. And then the amount of suffering that's gone into, just before we move on, just a quick thing, some of the technology they used was called, the Aardvark, which was basically a giant sonar receptor that would pick up the sound, I think it was called the Aardvark, would pick up sound of a gunshot within like 100-mile radius. So all the poachers were doing, they were putting a silencer on the end of their rifle and it couldn't be picked up. But by doing that, these poaching rifles are open-sighted rifles, so they don't have a telescopic scope or telescope on them. So you've got a rifle with the silencer, their aiming is horrible of these poachers. So they're just shooting them wherever they can to stop the animal. So you are having a lot more of these wounded creatures that are then undergoing the same amount of suffering, if not more. So there's just there is no proverbial silver bullet for the cure of or the fixing of rhinos, but the projects that are ongoing are certainly helping in some way.
Definitely. Kendall, let's go on to our elephant video, please.
All right. Do you want fig tree or elephant?
Elephants, please.
Okay.
So just behind us here we have a small group of elephants. We've just heard them calling, and I could hear a few more down in the distance. But what's really fascinating about this one is there is a tiny baby, days if not 1 day old. It really is small. It's actually trying to drink at the moment, and it's so small that it has to try and crane to actually get to the nipple. It is incredible to see these things when they're so young and doing their thing. Now at the moment we've had a huge amount of rain here at Sabi Sabi Private Game Reserve, and it means that there's a lot of good grass growth, but at the same time there is another food source that these elephants love, which is Marulas. Now Marulas form a huge part of the diet. There's even a couple of theories to suggest that males might hold a territory over this time around the marula trees, because of the fact that the herds will move in to try and take advantage of these energy-filled packs of fruit, vitamin C rich. Now they eat so many, and because their digestive systems are really fast, it takes between 4 to 6 hours from entry to exit, that the high vitamin C content and the movement through their body actually gives them a bit of diarrhea. And what they will do is they'll actually use this tree over here, this very silvery tree called the silver cluster leaf, which is high in tannins, to be able to self-medicate and to slow the gut down so that they don't overdo it. Earlier we saw this elephant bull going up, and he was actually using he leant up against the tree and pushed the tree to try and dislodge some of the fruit from the top, because everything's trying to get to it. First of all, we love the things. Warthogs, monkeys, baboons, bushbuck, everything tries to get to these fruits, so there's quite a lot of activity around them.
So folks, we saw that beautiful herd of elephants yesterday, and then this morning we watched that elephant bull walking through the grass plain, walking up to a specific tree, which we're actually shaded by at the moment, called a marula tree. Now at this time of year especially, sort of early on in the year, March, April, May, through until the rest of the year, there are some of these fruits lying in the ground. But specifically in February and March, they ripen and the elephants go crazy for them. Now we've got some elephant dung here, which I'm going to show you a little bit more about. You can actually tell the age of an elephant dung by, you get the maybe 3 or 4 days old, moisture content, all of that. I'm just kidding. So basically what we've got here is we've got some elephant dung. You can see it's elephant dung, separate from rhino dung. It's got some bark in it, as well as leaves and grass. But the special thing about this dung at the moment, as you can see here, if you open it up and you look at it like that, is you've got the fruit of this marula. Now 6 or 7 times higher in vitamin C than an orange, but it's mainly pit. So an elephant has got to drink or eat a lot of these to get whatever it needs out of them. And elephants will sit and they'll walk underneath this tree and they'll pick them up and they'll flick them into their mouth, crush them once, swallow, and then they'll just mush around inside for, as Rich pointed out yesterday, 4, 5, maybe 6 hours, and then pass them through. Very high in sugar as well. So elephants this time of year have a little bit more energy than they do other times of year. But the important thing about this is that when elephants eat this, it passes through their GIT, their gastrointestinal tract, and the emulsification and acidity in their stomach breaks down the cellulose around the seed, which allows it to then germinate and grow into another tree. So without elephants, this process doesn't occur, and that's why it's a very cool symbiotic relationship between the tree and the elephant.
We've got a beautiful herd of elephants behind us. They're a bit split and moved around. I'm busy feeding on grass. Elephants are an endangered species that requires a lot of protection and is still hunted on a daily basis. They believe that there's up to 30 elephants a day that are poached around Africa. So there is a huge number of poachings, all for this ivory, and the ivory forms a decorative form that has been used from pianos to carvings to knife handles to all sorts of different things. Because there's such a demand for this substance that's so decorative, it has been termed white gold, and the poaching is a huge issue. Now, beyond that, their role as elephants, we are stuck between a rock and a hard place where people believe that most reserves are overpopulated with elephants, but Africa is underpopulated and the poaching still remains an issue. The reason why overpopulation in a reserve becomes a huge issue is because the average adult, like this female, will push over between 3 to 4 trees daily. Now, the role that they play in this is to clear woody species from an area and make space for grassy species to grow, which keeps a mixed bushveld moving along. But where there are too many, or they're enclosed within an area, what we end up with is this overpopulation and too many trees being taken out at the same time. So there have been so many different controversial ways of conservation. The first one is obviously to cull. And for many years here within the Greater Kruger National Park, there was a lot of culling that was done. So animals were taken off. It was believed that the Kruger National Park held maybe space for around 17,000 elephants, and anything over that was over the carrying capacity of the land. Now, previously, when there were no national parks and there were no fences, elephants, if there was a drought, would move to new areas. These migratory paths would mean that babies like this little guy would have had to have traveled hundreds of kilometers to get to the next water source, which means the weak would have been weeded out, which means the bush in the areas that was under threat of drought would have had a chance to recover. Now we've put fences around these places and we get stuck with this issue. So in short, one of the biggest things that WWF are doing are trying to manage first of all, the poaching of the animals, one by education and making sure that people are taking care and understand the ecological impact that elephants have on an area. Secondly, to create great relationships with the community so that they can understand the benefits of what's going on. Ensuring laws and policies are put in place in order to ensure that there is no trafficking of these goods, and that bribery and corruption and all of the likes that come with trades like these illegal trades of ivory and rhino horn cease to exist. And then thirdly, to make sure that the areas are looked after and that the numbers are managed in different ways. I know in different areas they actually use contraception to slow the birth rate of animals, and what they'll do is they'll actually contracept a female for around 2 years and then allow her out of that contraception cycle so that she can have a baby. Because these are such emotionally complex creatures, having them not having babies for the rest of their lives will have a very negative impact on their social structures. So overall, the beauty of elephants is seeing them in the wild spaces, but management of those wild spaces and the people and communities around them needs to be looked after. and managed in order to create a happy space for all.
That's amazing stuff. And elephants if leopard's my favorite animal, elephants are my totem animal. If that really, it's like my spiritual creature. There's something about them. The emotion, when you get up close and you look into those big amber eyes, it's unbelievable. What's your feeling, Matt? Yeah.
My totem animal is a rhino, and it's because of their complete sheer lack of emotion and just hard-headedness and running into the direction of whatever it is. But I couldn't agree with you more. They are to listen to them communicate and to watch them move and maneuver. I mean, if you see that, there's the video with that adult cow running with the calf. She's always moving it in a direction that she is comfortable with it being in. You'll often see with the herd, if the herd gets frightened, they'll all surround the youngsters of the group and go at whatever threat they think is imposing on them together as a unit. They're an incredibly cohesive family unit with a remarkably just a very complex social structure. And as you said, with contraception, you just can't say, okay, well, you're an adult female now, you've had 3 calves, we're going to stop you from reproducing, because then the rest of the herd sees that female is no longer reproducing. She's no longer essentially an active part of that herd, because her youngsters will breed with other youngsters. Her youngsters will raise other youngsters. And so if a matriarch is no longer providing the role of being the matriarch, something will happen to her, and vice versa with the bull. If they are to just say, okay, we've got only one bull that can be reproductive, we're going to remove him, we're going to have contraceptive on him, it's the same thing. It doesn't work. They rely on that breeding progeny offspring to mesh and to weld those social structures together. And so yes, the emotive side of elephants is it's beyond what we can even comprehend, because I mean they don't speak our language, they don't communicate like we do. They're on a whole nother level, not to say superior or inferior, but something on par with how we communicate. We just can't understand it.
I mean, that's just so well put, Matt. And their communication fascinates me. They use these low-level rumbles that are created within the throat, and these low-level frequencies that go way below our hearing level. It's what we call infrasound, and it travels through the earth, not through the air, because earth, the more dense a substance is, the better sound travels through it, because the molecules are closer together to vibrate. And they did an experiment where they proved that an elephant could hear another elephant 14 kilometers away. That's nearly 10 miles away from the origin of the sound, which is mind-numbing. It really blows my mind. Kendall, let's go on to the fig tree, and then we'll answer a couple of questions.
So right around me here we have a sycamore fig, and fig trees are fascinating trees. They are the lifeblood for a lot of animals because these little fruits feed a lot of things, but it has a very interesting symbiotic relationship with one of the smallest creatures out here. It's a tiny little wasp, about 2 millimeters in length, and these little wasps help pollinate these guys. Now, these fruits, when unripened, are the first form of the flowers. The flowers actually live inside here, and what happens is the little wasps comes in through a hole in the bottom here, which for a tiny amount of time, only about 24 hours, does the fruit allow this hole to be open. Now this tiny little wasp comes straight in this hole. It's so tight that she loses her wings and she crawls inside there and lays her eggs. In doing so, she has been covered in pollen, and this pollen then makes the flowers then bloom. And the little babies, the eggs start growing inside there and everything's cool. And the males hatch before the females. And these males then go to their unborn sisters and start mating with the unborn sisters with a penis that is twice the length of his body. It's an incredible thing to think of. So the males then, after mating with these females, their job is to eat holes out, and by the coming in out of these 3 holes, they create a little chamber for the females to get out. Now, every single one of the fig trees in the world has a species specific wasp that pollinates it. So Sycamore Fig has a specific sycamore wasp that will go into this one, and they fruit at different times of the years. There isn't a single fruiting time for all the sycamore figs. So when the females come out, they now need to find the next fig tree that's ready to be pollinated. And they do this by using volatiles, which is a sense of smell or a pheromone that the tree actually gives off, that these wasps can then pick up and fly off to get to the next tree to start the life cycle once again. Just remember that this is a mutually exclusive relationship. If the tree were wiped out, the wasp would be wiped out, and vice versa. So an incredibly intricate interaction between 2 incredible species.
We like the word incredible.
We do.
Yeah, I'm buying a thesaurus. Kendall, do you have any questions for us?
Yes, I do. Going back to the elephants, there were a couple questions I'll combine here since they're related. Do the fences keep the elephants in? And if there's a drought in a fenced reserve, are water holes built to help the animals so they don't have to wander far to find water?
Go for it, Matt.
So the fences, yes, they do keep elephants in. On occasion, if you've got an elephant bull that just wants out, you're not going to stop a massive big elephant bull from going through a fence if he doesn't want to. But a lot of these reserves, yes, they do have artificial man-made water holes that water is pumped to. In the southern Kruger, the Sabi Sands, a lot of the river systems, they appear dry on top, but because of the underlying granite rock, the rock that makes up a vast majority of this area, there are these underground aquifers that sit right below the sandy bottom riverbeds. And so animals will actually dig into that and they'll get water, or the elephants will dig into that and they'll get water there. But in reserves that don't have, yes, certainly if you put a fence around something, you have to manage and maintain it. I've come back from the western part of the country, from a big reserve, and there they don't have water year round. And animals wouldn't have been there in the dead of winter. They would have migrated to other parts of the Kalahari Desert itself. So we do have to put these water points in. And it kind of goes back to what Rich was saying a little bit earlier about being able to be involved in conservation and tourism. There are a lot of these things that 20 years ago in the tourism industry, people weren't asking these questions. There was no, these thought questions were not coming out. And there's more and more interest as to the behind the scenes stuff and what goes into the makings of these ecosystems, like this question. So it's a great question, because a lot of people would have just been driving through and gone, oh, there's water, and carried on going. But we have to manage and maintain these. And like what Rich was saying with the overpopulations, same thing with water. If we think, oh, let's just put water points everywhere to give all these animals water, you've got other species that are water independent that need to travel 20 kilometers to get to water every day, because they survive on the vegetation that's 20 kilometers away from water. So if you put water points everywhere, there's no 20-kilometer stretch between 2 water points. And so these animals need that. And so you can't just put water everywhere. It's got to be very strategic, and it has to be well thought out. So very good question about that. But yes, there are artificial water points in certain areas. Yes, there are.
And added to that, the Kruger National Park put in 365 of these many years ago, and has realized the fault of it, and is in the process of slowly, strategically closing them down to try and again create those longer stretches between water sources.
All right. So this question's come up a couple times, so I thought I'd ask it. People have been hearing Sabi Sabi and Sabi Sands. Can you talk a little bit about the two and what the difference is?
Sure. So the Sabi Sands is the Greater Reserve. There were effectively how the Sabi Sands Game Reserve started was a whole bunch of smaller farms that were all fenced off from one another. And as an idea, they decided to drop their fences for management purposes and allow animals to flow more freely between them and become more tourist oriented. The Sabi Sabi is one of those farms or one of those reserves within the Greater Sabi Sands Game Reserve. It has now separated itself and is no longer part of it for other reasons, but it is still linked to it forever.
Mm-hmm. Let's do one more question and we'll go to the next video. Someone's wondering who does the maintenance on these fences and water holes. Are these local jobs?
Yeah, so again, we talk about the Sabi Sands. The Sabi Sands Game Reserve were the management company that managed the land, all the landowners' land within that area. So their job was to look after fences, their job was to look after anti-poaching, to control numbers. So there were often times where there weren't enough wildebeest in the area, so they would sell a rhino and bring in wildebeest, and you manage numbers like that. Even though you're part of this immense system, you're still micromanaging things because of the impact of fence lines. So the bigger an area is, the less management necessary, but the harder it is to manage in the greater scheme of things like poaching. But the smaller the area, the more micromanaged everything needs to be.
Mm-hmm. All right. Shall we go to the next video?
Yeah, we can do lions because I think we're running out of time already, Kendall.
Okay. 1 second here. Here we go.
So we're following a pride of lions called the Kambula Pride. We've just been sitting with them on the open plains. They were sleeping, and being primarily nocturnal creatures, they've just got active now. A lot of head rubbing, a lot of yawning and grooming that starts the whole process off. Now they're on the move. We've got a spotlight on them at the moment, but the spotlight is very undistracting to them. Their eyes are far more able to adjust to light than what ours are. And should they get into a situation where there's more of a hunting situation, we'll switch off the light to level the playing fields between everything and wait in the dark for something to happen. But while they're just moving along like this, it's an amazing feeling just following these things. They are it's a nice big pride of lions. How many are there, Matt?
I think we counted 9.
Nine
individuals that we've got here.
9 individuals moving along here. I mean, it's quite spectacular to be in such close proximity to such incredible creatures.
So we just watched those lions that Rich was talking about a little bit earlier get active. They play a little bit in the sun, in the setting sun, and then we followed them through to another open plain. So the zebra were coming from sort of this direction, the lions were facing here, but the wind was blowing straight over their back. So they probably had some thought of, well, this is not going to work. So they went to the next open plain, came through, it's kind of spread out, and we sat. There was another vehicle with us, sat on the other side on either end of this open plain. There was a herd of wildebeest as well as a herd of zebra and some impala and one lone waterbuck. And so we switched all the lights off and just sat there for about 15-20 minutes just trying to figure out and listen what was going on. And then all of a sudden it was just this rush and these hooves clattering all around us everywhere. 2 male lions ran straight past the vehicle after the herd of wildebeest. and a herd of zebra.
Is that a lion?
Yeah.
Is that a lion?
Yeah. 2 lions there. And actually separated a small young foal from the rest of the herd. So you've got this zebra foal here, and all of the lions had been able to encircle it.
Yeah, somebody, I think they missed, but there's one coming. So I'm just gonna stand by here and see what happens.
Yeah, there's my daughter running towards you now.
And then over in the distance, the herd of zebra was calling. So you heard the mother frantically calling back at the foal, and luckily it just kind of maybe through fortuitous thinking closed its eyes and just ran back to its mother and got away.
Ah, right. The baby zebra lived, baby, another day.
Where did he go?
Yeah, get away.
So the foal was saved. But then the lions honed in on that waterbuck and they missed that as well. And then as that was kind of unfolding, over in the distance on either side of us, to the south there were some male lions roaring, into the north there were some other lions which we're not quite sure of who they were. But to the south is the 4 sort of dominant males that are in this area, who yesterday morning were coming sort of east and then northeast from the southern and southwestern part of the reserve. So who knows, tomorrow when we go back in the morning we could find a whole bunch of lions together, because the males were roaring in the south and then the rest of the other lions were roaring in the north, with this pride that we'd been following for the evening in the middle. So fingers crossed we get something tomorrow morning.
Guys, we're on our way in to lions. This morning when we went out, we found 2 males and 2 females. And if you remember from earlier, we mentioned last night that we heard 4 males calling in the distance, and the rest of the Kambula Pride were busy chatting or listening to this whole thing. And during the night, they actually came together. And what was amazing is when I woke up this morning, I walked out to see Matt. I stepped on a lion paw print.
Massive male lion footprint.
Yes, and it was right in front of my room. They'd walked right in front of our rooms through the night. So we found these guys earlier and they were mating. Now the sun's starting to set. Hopefully we'll get some action and maybe even listen to them roaring.
Ah, that'd be awesome, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's the best. What are you with the mating? What's your feeling on the mating? What do you think she's doing?
Well, I mean, it's an older lioness, so she's probably her cubs are now probably in the 18-month to 2-year region. We've got one right over here. We've got a young male, older male over here.
They would have stayed in the shade for the majority of the day, and now as it's starting to cool down, the sun's starting to set, they'll start to get active. So hopefully we will be able to see a much higher mating frequency. Usually they mate sort of 3-4 times an hour, but anyway, I mean, I've seen lions mating, what's the most you've ever seen? 10, 12, 15 times an hour?
Every 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah. And so because they're 2 males as well as 2 females, every single time the female who's an estrus is going to get up, the male who's mating with her will get all antsy. If she comes anywhere near this other male, he'll then try and cut her off from that. And that's why they've moved about 200 or 300 meters over the course of the heat of the day. So as she would get up and move to try and move into a shadier spot, he would then push her further and further away from his brother. And so he's over here and the others are underneath the vegetation behind us over here. So let's see what we're going to see.
Now, what's often fascinating about this situation just in general is these 2 females have broken away from the rest of the pride, which we also found while we were looking for a leopard this morning. And this one female has sort of tried to entice these males to mate. When we saw them yesterday, there were some adolescent lions with them. So the adolescents looked at about the age that it's time to move on for the boys and the girls will stick around. So these ladies will be going back into estrus. If the cubs were a bit younger and not as old as what they are, often what the females will do is actually go in, try and get males to distract them and pull them away so that they don't kill those cubs. But it's very likely with this pride pushing far further west out of its territory than normal, that they're actually just trying to solidify these males' position and get babies and start the next generation of lions.
So the last time you had us, we were coming into the sighting. We've got these two lionesses, these two male lions, and where you've got competition between male lions, there's always potential for chaos and for disruption. And they did not disappoint. So we were setting sun, trying to figure out where these lions were going to go. They hadn't done anything for, I don't know, maybe about 30 minutes or so. And so we come around to the one side, and you've got the submissive male, and one of the females had come up and tried to coax him a little bit of action. And then you had the more dominant male, the male that was mating, and then the female that he was mating with. So we thought, no, we'll go around to the other side and we'll sit with the more submissive male. We drive around and we position ourselves there with these lions here, and then the other two over there, the more dominant male. And we all know what's going to happen is that female's going to come up and she's going to try and coax this other male, and it's just going to cause chaos. And what chaos did it cause?
Oh my God.
I mean, I think it was almost in the vehicle. Rich was, right, I mean, this lion just came right up to here, and and carried on walking there.
He suddenly, it was crazy because as they were sitting there, the male came in, and we'd already called it beforehand, like, guys, get ready, because when this guy comes in, there's going to be fireworks. And as he came in, he came rushing into us. It sent cameramen's arms up in the air and flailing. And everything sort of died down afterwards. We were crying with laughter. It was amazing. But the two ladies then left off, and we were talking earlier about how, they're trying to mate with these guys. There could be ploys involved if they're trying to draw things away. And it turned out to be exactly that. The lionesses went off on the mission. The other male went following the females. He was marking. They were moving. They were moving at quite a brisk pace.
Yeah, no, they were going.
They then stopped to drink at that one water hole, which was fascinating because they sort of took 2 sips and
then carried on.
And Donald had said to us, no, when they drink, we've got time because they drink for a lot.
Yeah.
And they went, and off they went.
Yeah.
And then he came in and he stuck around for a bit.
Drank out a full mouthful.
This whole thing, and
disappeared. Gone.
The girls were gone, and he couldn't pick up their trail at all. He was walking in circles. It was mad. Yeah. And then all the lions roaring at the end.
Different and in different directions. We had the one male by himself, then his brother was calling, the one he had left behind, and then we started hearing the other 2 males. What we thought was the other 2 males. But like what we were saying, that the one of the lionesses looked like she was starting to lactate, and so she very well could have. What Rich was saying, she very well could have been there to just draw those males away, mate with them for the day, and then as soon as the males are preoccupied with something else, territory, scent marking, and then disappear and go back to the rest of the pride. So we'll just have to see what we find tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Or here tonight.
What a treat.
Sure.
And maybe they'll come past our house.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Incredible footage, guys. Those stories were amazing.
It was I nearly died. I laughed so hard when that lion rushed the vehicle. The videographer sitting directly behind us, Ian, and he's a big chap. He makes me look like a small guy, and I think he was on the other. He jumped across the other side of the vehicle, and I think I heard a at the same time. It was, I mean, that line was, he came so close, but it's that tension created. And that second line didn't want anything to do with it. That's why he went and lay down there. And that it kind of, without anthropomorphizing our reaction to these sightings, it kind of solidifies what we were thinking, is that these two lionesses were essentially there as a distraction. And they were there to create a bit of friction between these two brothers to allow them to then get away. Because normally that kind of a behavior, those male lions would have separated, because they would have realized, oh, well, one male is taking over the other. And a lioness going from one male to the next, something's going to happen. There's going to be jealousy. There's going to be testosterone. There's going to be fighting. And you're always going to have a dominant and a submissive male out of those two, and that interaction. But I mean, we were expecting it. Both Rich and I were filming it on our, getting it on our phone. We're like, oh, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. And you can see the videographers are just completely caught on, like, whoa, what was that? What was that?
Yeah.
Because he was right there. I mean, that's a good close 450, 500 pounds with a full stomach cat rushing you. It's, woo.
It's real. It's awesome. I think I'll send the video onto you, Kendall. You guys can post it on the NetHab on social media, because it'd be great for people to see just how close they came. You've got to understand, these are hardened videographers at the back that are carrying the cameras, and they missed the whole scene. It was amazing. It was truly, I thought the tracker was going to fall off the front seat. He was laughing.
He was laughing so hard.
So hard. Have you got any questions for us, Kendall?
Yeah, we've got a few questions here about vehicles. So the first one is, are the number of safari vehicles controlled in Sabi Sabi and Sabi Sands?
Yes, very much. So they're maximum 3 vehicles in a lion sighting for most reserves. It depends on the situations. If there's cubs involved, they might be limited to 2 or even 1. And if the cubs are too small, it will actually even be vetoed as a negative sighting. You're not allowed going in there because the cubs are too impressionable. You only want to see the cubs when mom's around, so her relaxed nature goes onto those cubs. She becomes, or they become accustomed to the car. It's a process we call habituation, and it's been done through generations. Like Matt was saying with the leopards, if the car is in the way of a leopard, it won't go around it, it'll go under it, because it is so used to those cars being there, because from a very young age, they have been indoctrinated or habituated into understanding that the vehicle is not a threat in their life. So yeah, that's how we control the sightings and allow them to be more relaxed and not crowd them too much.
And it's through careful management, essentially, of those. In each, if you go into a national park, for the most part, it's a bunch of different operators sort of focusing on their guests, because it's ultimately about their one experience and that's it. Whereas in these private reserves, you've got a hierarchy amongst your guides. So you'll have a head guide or a head ranger, and ultimately every decision in the field is made by him or her. And so what will happen is, usually you've got your 3 vehicles at this sighting, 2 vehicles at that. But then if there's a different situation, like when we had those lions hunting in the open, our guide Ali would have just radioed the hit and said, hey, there's a lot of space, we could probably have 1 more vehicle. Or if the animal's going to really dense vegetation, you say, guys, it's getting too close up, let's one of us leave. So it's that communication amongst the guides that has allowed for these animals to be, because they're not tame. That's a misunderstanding and a misconception. They are the furthest from tame, but they know that these vehicles pose no threat to them because they've all grown up with them and they've all been around them for the longest time. And so by these procedures and these behaviors of the guides and their respect for the animals and the trackers and their respect and knowing the animals, we've created this environment where we can get that close, where a lion just sees us as there and he's going to chase his brother right into the vehicle because he knows nothing's going to happen. It's just going to be a dong, ow, oh, that was too close, and then he's going to walk off. Or a leopard will literally walk, go, oh, there's something I want to snip under the vehicle and then carry on out the other side. It doesn't mean anything.
But remember, if one of the cameramen had decided that this was too scary and jumped out of the vehicle, the game would have changed. Yeah. Exactly. Huh. Strong claws and not so much fighting amongst themselves. So yeah,
Exactly.
we just got to, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to skip to a couple lion questions here because I noticed we are past time. So we'll call it after these two. Do most prides just have one resident male, and will a male lion protect cubs that are in its pride if it didn't father them?
So essentially, a pride of lions is related lionesses and their offspring, and then you've got male lions which are dominant. Those can be in coalitions, anything up to, the biggest one I've seen is 7, but typically it's 2 or 3 at the most, because then you've got competition with those that you can breed with. Now, a male lion out of a coalition of 5 or 6 that doesn't necessarily sire cubs, he will still, within his territory and within his homeward ground, he would then look after those cubs by default by defending that territory. And essentially, those are his genetics, because ultimately he is typically related to, if by not being blood brothers, at least cousins, siblings of siblings with those others in his coalition. So he's still essentially protecting his progeny, even if he didn't sire them himself. So yeah, it's a lion family dynamics is much like a soap opera. There's a lot of back and forth and happenings, but typically a pride is lionesses and their cubs, and then you've got a coalition of males or 1 or 2 males that will be dominant over an area in which those lionesses and cubs, that pride would essentially reside in.
And within that, the males are only there for a fleeting moment. So anything between sort of 2 and 4 years that they'll stick and reign over that area. And when a female goes into estrus, if there are multiple males within a coalition, it is not unheard of that she will go to the biggest, strongest one of the 3 that she likes the most, spend majority of time with him, but then go to the other 2 males or other male and mate with him too for a couple of days. And she could potentially have a split litter with different genetic babies coming out of one female. And that's her way of not putting all her eggs in one basket and moving along. When there's a lot of males, that were the 5 Mapocho males that were in the Sabi Sands, Matt knew them well, they ran their territory for over 8 years, and in that time they only sired about 3 cubs to adulthood. In their tenure, they killed over 100 lions, their own babies, other females. It was just chaos. They were psychotic lions. But it's funny how that all happened, because it was after the time when the fences had been dropped and lion populations were really high, and they basically leveled the playing field for everyone and brought it down into balance. So male lions play very, very different roles within the prides.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Well, guys, I know you could talk well into the night, but I am going to call it there with questions and hand it back over to both of you for closing comments. Let's start with Matt.
Thanks, Kendall. And yeah, thanks again so much to NatHab and the WWF for allowing us to go back out into the field and to get this incredible footage and to have this amazing time. And for allowing us to present tonight. And thank you to all of you for coming tonight or today. We got over 1,000 people signing on today. That is just awesome. So thanks everyone. Thanks Kendall, WWF and NatHab. It's been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. You were a rock star out in the field and tonight. And thank you, Kendall and WWF and NatHab. And thank you most to all of you that tuned in to watch. Really, guys, it is amazing. We're used to doing groups of 6 people on a vehicle. It's amazing to think that we have so many people tuned into this. And it's a great way for people who are never able, or probably will never be able to get out there, to see this too. So I really hope you enjoyed as much as we enjoyed putting it together for you all.
Thanks again, guys. This really was such a special webinar today. I really appreciate you taking the time to show us your experiences out in the bush. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation and we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Night, everyone.